guys hear me and see me okay? I've got the AirPods in.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Before we get started, let's talk about an interesting story, something that you've encountered. And I'm sure you have plenty of stories to share with us, but let's talk about something.
From like my training?
Yeah, from your training, during med school, residency, from recently, whatever you think that would be interesting for our viewers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, every year you're training, there's something that you'll remember. And you kind of mark each year of your training with something funny that may have happened or something interesting that happened. So for me, I think the funniest thing was finding out that I matched in my residency. That was one of the more jarring experiences. So, I went to med school in Poland for the first 2 years for basic science. I then came back, and like everybody else, I was like, all right, I gotta take step one. And I'm like, I'm ready. Biochemistry, I know everything. And I took a Kaplan pre-assessment, unbeknownst to me that I ended up working at Kaplan, got like a 36. I'm like, oh my God, 36, it's terrible. It's out of 100. That's okay. I'm gonna take this 6-week class. Gonna get 100. Took a 6-week class, took a post-assessment, got a 38. And I was like, all right, that wasn't what I expected. But somehow I ended up studying, doing well, ended up going through third year and fourth year in Brooklyn. And then after med school was done, I actually took a year to do a research fellowship at a hospital that's not open anymore called St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City. And while I was doing that research training, I also started doing some research at Lenox Hill, which is actually just across the street. And I started working for a doctor named Dr. Greg Haber, who's a world-renowned gastroenterologist. And I got to learn a lot about GI from him. And I was always interested in GI. And I knew that to strengthen my application, to be a better applicant, I needed to pump out a bunch of research. So I was doing that, and I get a phone call that, hey, you got an interview at Lenox Hill. I was like, awesome, schedule it, get ready, shirt, tie, try to look all nice. And I go into this interview, and I'm in a room of about 15, 20 people, and people that I don't know. And I'm really like anxious and nervous. But you interview, and all of us either are about to go through that process, will go through that process, or for a lot of us, we have gone through that. And it's a moment where it's strange because part of you has to be humble and part of you has to brag about how awesome you are. And it's a very weird position to have to be put into, because on one hand, you want to be like, I do all this community service. On the other hand, you want to say, I am the smartest thing since Einstein. And you want to be able to portray all that to an application and to a residency program director without causing too much strife. So I got this interview finished, and I go home, and it's just before Thanksgiving, kind of like around this time period. And I do the interview, and then I'm going on my other interviews, and then I'm back doing research just downstairs at Lenox Hill on the second floor. And I get an email that says, please call the medicine office. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, I called the medicine office. What have I done? And so instantly, I think all of us, even though we're adults, we assume we did something wrong. And so I'm like, oh, I must be in trouble. So I call. And it's the program coordinator. And she says, oh, the program director, Dr. Dibner, would like to see you. Instantly, I just go flush. And I'm like, oh my God, I must have offended somebody in the interview. What have I done? Oh no. And just start freaking out. And it was the longest elevator ride from the second floor to the 6th floor of the building. So I go in there, knock on the door, sheepishly look inside and try to figure out, what's going on. She's, oh, come in, have a seat. And I was, in my head, I just wanted to be like, I'm sorry, I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry already. And it turned out she's like, so, everybody really liked you during the application process and during the interview. Do you have any plans for the coming months? And I said, I was just going to continue doing research downstairs. She said, do you think they'd mind if you weren't doing research anymore? I was like, nope. I don't think they'd mind, because now I'm thinking, I'm going to get a residency. She's like, well, we'd love for you to be a resident here. She's offering me a pre-match. Wow. Yes, absolutely. Grab my pen. Where do I sign? And I was like, this is awesome. I signed the contract. I looked at it, and I looked at it, and then she's like, yeah, so are you've got about 6 weeks to get your stuff together. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And she's like, yeah, this is for a January start. Wow. And I was like, January, like a month and a half from now, January. She's like, yeah, is that okay? And I was like, no, it's fine. Yeah, I'll be ready. And so I walked in thinking I'm in trouble. End up finding I'm going to get a residency. And not only was the residency 6 months sooner than I was expecting, but I ended up being the last pre-match. And then that year, that match, the NRMP did away with pre-match. And it's funny, but all of us start out somewhere. You know, you were telling me you were going to end up in maybe Brooklyn or Harlem at Turo, and you ended up in Arizona.
Mhm.
You have no idea where we're going to end up. But for me, it's always kind of fun to think back on sort of the circuitous route we all take.
Yeah,
But when you look back, I guess all's well that ends well.
absolutely.
So that's kind of my story. That we all, even at our age, even at 37, I'll still assume I'm in trouble when I get called down to the principal's office.
Well, that's a very interesting story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's an older story, but yeah, I hope people can identify with it.
Beautiful. So let's get started. All right. So please give us an introduction about, you told us a little bit about your journey, but tell us what you're doing right now,
Sure.
where you're training, and how long it has taken you to be you. And I know you've written books, so tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a native of New York, and I went to med school at Medical University of Silesia in Poland. It's similar to a lot of our offshore Caribbean programs where you're there for basic science. Rotated here in Brooklyn. I did my residency and chief residency and my fellowship at Lenox Hill Hospital. And after that was all done, my first job out of residency was fellowship, I should say. I'm the associate program director for the internal medicine residency at Brookdale Hospital.
Mhm.
I'm also GI faculty. I'm an assistant clinical professor at Turo. I'm also a clinical professor for AUA as well as St. George's, because I'm the St. George's clerkship director and the clerkship director for New York Medical College. I teach 2 full-time classes at a med school, which is at Turo. And some of you guys might know me from a couple of tiny books I co-authored with Dr. Fisher called Master of the Boards, Step 2 and Step 3. And so that's kind of just a brief synopsis of everything I do. I'm a gastroenterologist and an internist, and I'm here.
Wow. So you wear a lot of different hats.
Mhm.
Tell us,
Yeah.
how do you balance all this? I mean, that's a lot of
Yeah.
different things to do. And you're
I
practicing
know.
medicine right now, correct?
Yeah, medicine as an internist, GI as well. Part of being an APD, you have to keep your internal medicine roots active. So I do a decent amount of internal medicine where I see patients on the hospitalist service.
Mhm.
I'll do GI where I'm scoping on a weekly basis, taking calls. I've had days where I'll start out the day meeting about resident issues, then see patients with the residents teaching service. Then I'll get paged at night to do a banding case for a variceal bleeder. And so it's a little bit of mix of everything. And I kind of like that. I like the variety.
Mhm.
I will say the way to wear that many hats, whether it's academic, clinical, is just time management.
Mhm.
I could definitely admit that it's an art. It takes some time. And the hardest part about time management is saying no, is knowing when things don't fit. And I had a hard time with that early on where I was like, yes, let's do it all. Let's teach this class. Let's travel to this country. Let's go there. Let's do this. And there was a period of time where in my entire chief year, I was also affiliated with Kaplan at the time, was part of like the marketing team that went out to South America to teach classes. And so in residency you get 4 weeks of vacation. I spent a little over 4 weeks in South America touring around teaching classes to people who are striving to take the USMLE down there. And it was a great deal of fun. And you range from there to now being in Brooklyn, and you always want to say yes to everything. And I think the hardest part is we as doctors don't know how to say no.
Mhm.
And so it's a very difficult thing to learn to say no. But it's empowering at times because then you can pick and choose and prioritize what you want.
Mhm.
And I would say it was a hard thing to learn, to
Absolutely.
focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, something that I struggle with. You're
That's
right.
okay.
It takes years and years of experience, but you're right. We always have this tendency. We're obligated. We feel obligated to always say yes to things.
Of course.
We
And,
want
and
to
and it's not
grow.
even like the extracurriculars, even in your clinical work, being on committees, having to help out with hospital duties. For example, residents are asked to come help with applicants, things like that. Those are not your requirements. You're doing that because you love the program, want to help the program, want to help the future applicants. But doctors have a hard time saying no. And I think that's part of the reason why what makes this so great,
Mhm.
but it's also part of the reason why some of us are so tired.
Always these dark circles. It's because we don't sleep.
That's what the helmet's for. So,
So tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with board prep. Because when I was
sure.
studying for my step 2 and step 3, I remember watching your videos and Dr. Fisher's videos, and
Yeah.
extremely helpful. So
Thanks. Thanks.
give us a little input about that.
So my mom is a teacher. My grandmother is a teacher. My two aunts on my mom's side are teachers. My grandma was like, it's really cute, but whenever we go back to the village in India, everyone sees her and they like try to pay respects to her because she's taught multiple generations of people. Um, and when my parents came to this country, my mom was involved in academics and teaching. My dad was in business, like most immigrant parents, right? And growing up, I would come home from school and I'd be like, all right, time to go play outside. I'm gonna play baseball and basketball. And I'd come home and there'd be a stack of extra books. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And she's like, that's your extra math homework. I'm like, well, what extra homework? What does that mean? I have home, I did my work. How is there extra? This doesn't fit logic, mom. And at a young age, I would be doing extra math and science, and it paid off now. But all those years of her sitting with me and teaching kind of instilled this kind of love of it.
Mhm.
I first picked up the bug of board prep when I took my own course. When I took my step 1 class, I had Dr. Golian for PATH,
Oh yeah,
which
this
was
guy's
like,
amazing.
right, like it's like saying you saw like Mickey Mantle play in the Yankees or something. And then I had Dr. Fisher live, and then I had, oh, I forgot his name. He was one of the pharmacy guys who basically invented Viagra.
Hmm.
And so like we had these powerhouse guys teaching us board review, and the whole time I'm like, that's what that means. This all makes sense. And
Yes.
like the light bulbs were going on and like tube lights everywhere, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And that constant
Uh-huh.
moment, that aha moment, I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I actually applied to be like a med advisor, where you're kind of helping out other students who are going through the same process as an international grad. And then I took that role and I got involved with some curriculum development. And then, excuse me. And then I took my step 2 and I got a wonderful score, which I'm still so thankful for, because I think that's what set everything in the right direction. And around that time, I was just casually passing Dr. Fisher, and he was working on a book called Routine Miracles.
Mhm.
And for those of you who haven't read it, if you're feeling down about going to work, read that book and you're going to feel like Osler, and you're going to want to save patients 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's an amazing read.
Add it to my
And I
list.
think all doctors should read that book at least once every 5 years, just to
What is it
rekindle
called?
their routine miracles.
Okay.
It's a book about what Dr. Fisher writes about how on a daily basis we perform routine miracles in medicine, right? Bevacizumab, curing blindness. That's only written in one of the book, and it's called the Bible. So, you've got these amazing things that we do. And so I helped him do some research for that book. And then he one day was like, hey, do you want to write a sample chapter for my step 2 book? And I was like, sure. So I wrote a sample chapter, and then he taught me how to write. And then that later became teaching and then working in board prep. And then later on, we merged and created our own company called MedQuest Reviews, where we now do step 2 and step 3, and not to mention step 1, and American Board of Internal Medicine review, and shelf review, and in-service review. And that's how I got involved with board prep. But it all started with like my 9-year-old self sitting at my kitchen table, kind of like I'm doing now, like doing math problems because my mom made me. Yeah.
That's amazing. So let's talk about GI. What made you
Oh,
want to pursue GI?
my love. So I tell this story a lot in classes, but I actually went into med school thinking I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. Ugh. And I was like, yes, I'm going to fix joints and bones. And wow, I could not be more wrong. It didn't fit. It wasn't like my whatever, like my wheelhouse. I remember I had internal medicine as a rotation, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. And then I went into surgery, and this is still when you had Q3 24-hour calls as medical students. And so you'd be called like 24 hours a day, every third day. And within like 2 weeks, I was like, I would rather drive the bus. And so, no, thank you. And so then I was like, surgery's out. But I was still like, no, let me do like a little time in ortho. So my hospital that I did my rotations was amazing, because if you go to the rotations coordinator, like, you're on 12 weeks of surgery, I'm like, can I get a week of ortho? They're like, yeah, go ahead, hang out. And so I went out and hung out with the ortho guys. I'm 6'2", and these guys all were bigger than me. That was so weird. They were like 6'8", 300 pounds. They were lifting patients with one arm. And I'm like, I am not that small, and yet you guys dwarf me. Second, it was a lot of heavy duty handwork, which I liked. I liked the idea of doing things with your hands. But what I didn't like was, like, it was very mechanical, right? Like, you have this issue, you do this surgery, and then they go to rehab. And I missed, like, where are the infections? Where's the autoimmune? Where's all this cool stuff? I miss my cytokines. Like, what's happening, right? So I was like, right, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And while I was in the OR observing an ortho case, a gastroenterologist, well, I just said that weird, gastroenterologist came in, and he was doing a case. And this dude was the smoothest guy I had ever seen. And then he did a lecture on inflammatory bowel disease, and I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be that guy. So I walked up to him after the lecture, and I said, hey, doc, I want to be a gastroenterologist. And apparently, because the hospital that I was at had so many medical students, he'd heard that so often. And he's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, just come see me tomorrow. I was like, okay. I showed up at 8 a.m. and I'm waiting for him there. I waited till like 10:30 till he got there. And he's like, you're here? I'm like, hey. And his name is Mukul Ari. I actually dedicated the Step 2 book to him. He actually tells a story. He's like, yeah, I told him to show up the next day, and I haven't been able to get rid of him since. He ended up becoming very close. He taught me everything that I needed to know about that time, about like what to expect. He's like a mentor. He was my first mentor. And that's how I got involved with GI. I fell in love with the fact that you have procedures, you have physiology, you have pathology. It's one of the fields, many fields have this. Hematology also has this, where you can spend time with a microscope, talk to patients, do procedures, obtain samples. You could do it all if you really wanted to. And that's what I liked. I really like the fact that it's never boring. Constipation is not boring. It might seem like it is, but I am like, let's get you unplugged. Let's find out what works. And everybody eats. You eat. I eat. I've been to an Afghani restaurant, and I was like, the food is unreal. And you go to an Indian restaurant, the same thing. You go to a Mexican place or a Chinese place, a pizza place. Food is a huge part of our culture. But so is heartburn and tummy aches and constipation and diarrhea. And we're coming into holiday stomach time, where we've got Thanksgiving and the winter holidays coming up. This is my busy season. So if you're out there and you're like, I really love procedures, but I don't want to give up patient care, or not so much patient care, but like real deep patient interaction and science. And I don't want the orthos to get upset, but you get what I'm trying to say. Fields like urology, gastroenterology, pulmonary critical care, these are fields that offer you a combination of everything.
Okay. So you do internal medicine, and then how many years of fellowship do you do in order to become a GI specialist?
So it's 3 years of fellowship plus a year of a subspecialty training if you want to do interventional. Or if you really love liver, you can do a year of transplant hepatology. Or if you really fall in love with, let's say, motility, where it's just like diagnosing motility disorders, you can do a year of that. You can also do an additional year or two of just liver, where you become like super liver guy. And those are your other options. There are a lot of other fellowships that are now slowly developing. There's obesity fellowships,
Mm-hmm.
there's bariatric fellowships.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your journey. I mean, you went to med school in Poland, and then let's talk about what it's been like as an international medical graduate and
Sure.
coming from immigrant family background. What have been some of the challenges and struggles that you faced,
Sure.
up to this point?
I think everyone who's watching, right? If you're an international medical graduate or you're someone from another country who wants to practice medicine here, the biggest challenge for everyone is the USMLE, step 1, step 2, and step 3. Those are the biggest challenges. And I think for me, I was fortunate in that I had good mentorship, I had very good advice. And at that time, I would almost say that the benefit of studying when I studied was that there weren't that many options of courses or board review or Q banks. Now there's one on every corner. It's like Starbucks. And they're all okay, right? You're going to learn what hexokinase is, right? And then you quickly learn after that no one walks into the office says my hexokinase feels a little off, right? Biochemistry is the hardest class in med school, and yet it's got the least amount of clinical outcome later on. And I'm sure the biochemists out there are all going to flood my DMs with death threats of, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. But, I think that's the biggest challenge. The other challenge I think that also happens is the country is in a lot of turmoil, and we don't know what's going to happen to people from other countries, and are they going to be valued? This is a country that's built on diversity and sort of the efforts and beauty. 23% of all practicing physicians in the United States are international medical graduates. That's 216,000 doctors, right? That's people in New York to California. There are people right now in Idaho who are international graduates who uplifted and left their families and their lives to have this opportunity. And I think all of our journeys and all of our stories are unique in that we all had to make sacrifices. At the same time, I think for the international graduates, I think the big challenge is that you constantly have to prove yourself. You're just as good as your score. Like in the mob movies and the mafia movies, hey, you're only as good as your envelope of money. In the board world, you're only as good as your numbers.
Yeah.
And on one hand, yes, standardization for scores to compare helps.
Yeah.
On the other hand, people have great scores. So what if I have a whole room full of great score people? That's the difficulty. I have 4,000 applicants sitting behind my ERAS screen at work.
Yeah.
And they all seem lovely on scores. And so then the next hard struggle is differentiating yourself. And that's a whole another conversation. It's whether US clinical experience matters, whether it's important to do research, whether it's this, whether it's that. Those questions are so individual, depending on each person's circumstance. But the hardest thing is that. And then what I mean by the countries in turmoil is that, are we going to be able to, as a country, provide visas for people who want to come here and help our sick Americans when we have such a massive shortage of physicians? There's a data, if I remember correctly, something close to like 100,000 physicians short across the country.
Wow.
So we have a dilemma in the United States, and with 2020 looming around the corner, with 50% of the population reaching obesity, with some states having BMIs over 30 as the 50% mark, we're going to face epidemics. Not even epidemics, we already are, with hypertension, diabetes, fatty liver, high cholesterol. So the internationals, and I'm just rambling, but the internationals, I think we fill that role. This is what we do. It's our thing.
Absolutely. And like you said, there is definitely a shortage of physicians, but especially primary care physicians. And I think a lot of international medical graduates, even if like we have a bunch of doctors who are trained like cardiothoracic surgeons and this and that, and they come here and start all over again, do residency and end up in primary care field. So they're filling a huge void in our society. And
My chief resident right now, she was an OBGYN in South India for 10 years.
yeah.
She came here, she did medicine, and now she's going to do most likely primary care. And I asked her, I said, why didn't you do OB? She says, I did it already. Why don't I try something else? I was like, okay.
There you go. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So interview season is coming up. What?
Yeah.
It's such a nerve-wracking and daunting time for students.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what are some of your advice for those students. So let's talk about first the ones that do get the good scores and are there. How can they separate themselves from the rest of the applicants who also have good scores? What can they do to get your attention as as an assistant program director, or to just be seen as a better applicant than somebody else with same scores?